there was a tradition in Olympia too where Olympia artists would all go together and play somewhere else. And there was like Olympia goes to Seattle and they play at the Metropolis. Or Olympia goes to Bellingham and play at the All Ages Space Theater. Or Olympia goes to Portland. I think there was one of those shows here. And so at those shows there would be a lot of artists, like 10 or something, and everyone would play short sets. So I thought, let's have this show where they have the experimental music people, and we'll have them all do like 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll have a lot of people. Because most of the shows are going to be not a lot of people. I hate shows where there's 10 bands. So I wanted all the shows to be very concise. Put them together, here's 4 bands that fit well together. And that, to me, was too many. But there's so many bands I wanted to fit some people in, so I compromised with myself. 4 bands, Bill, that would work. But this one night, I wanted it to be more like, let's just show the wealth of the creative endeavors that are out there. And some people were like excited. Oh great, an opportunity to do my thing in front of people. And they were psyched. Some people were like, well, how come we're in this new music ghetto? How come you don't have us playing on Friday night with all the punk bands? I don't think, how come I can only play for 10 minutes? And I'm like, well, that's just the concept of the show. It's like think of it as a curated event at the gallery. I don't know, man. So, some people didn't play, that I had asked. But some people did, and it was a lot of fun. And then, but I also felt like another thing that was important about Olympia was that women were involved in a lot of things. So I thought, and this was hard, I thought, I want it to be not just women performing music, or just there's a girl singer in the band. I thought, because Candace, who was involved with Kay, was also involved with organizing the convention, and other people were involved in organizing, and Lois and Margaret, who had a store downtown called Chip Wheels, she was involved in organizing some of the events. I thought, what else about getting even more important would be like finding some role that is very, very, there was a tradition of like women in the administrative end of the music business. But there was one thing that I had never seen, and that is a woman who does sound. I'd never seen that in all the shows I played or attended. So I thought, I'm going to find a woman to do sound at the convention. So I found one. And there weren't a lot of them out there. I couldn't find, it was really hard to find. I was touring all over in 1990 and in early 91. And I found a woman who was doing sound at Gilman Street in Berkeley. And so I was like, oh hey, how long have you been doing this? It's like, oh, I'm just learning. This because Gilman was like a cooperative, and everyone there was volunteer. And she was a volunteer sound person, and she was learning how to do sound. And I said, well, I'm going to be doing this, a big event in Olympia, and I'm looking for sound people. And are you interested in coming to Olympia and working on sound? And she was just like, what? That didn't make any sense to her at all. She wasn't interested. She didn't even know why she would be interested. So it's cool. But then I was playing a show at Reed College in Portland, and there was a woman there named Nellie Korn. And she was listening to the Corn Dogs, which is a Seattle group of experimental music. I forget the name of the woman who runs that, who's the main saxophonist. But anyway, yeah, Amy Denial, the Amy Denial's group. And I was like, oh wow, you're listening to the Corn Dogs.
Tone Dogs.
The tone belt. That's what. That was it. Yeah. Thanks for that correction. Please correct me at any time. So I said, wow, that's really cool. I said, I'm doing this convention and I'm looking for sound people. I'm wondering if you're interested in coming up to Olympia for that. And she said, oh, I might be. And see, Nellie was very careful and she did everything very methodically. She was very organized. And so she was like, send me information, like a proposal, and I can consider it. Well, there hadn't really been any proposals written for the International Pop Underground Convention. In fact, nothing had been. It was just like, I'd call up Patty and say, hey, what about the theater? It's like, yeah, it's cool. And she didn't say, sign this contract. And, you know, Smithfield, he just said, oh, I guess it's fine. And so I was like, whoa, okay. So I wrote up a little thing. I said, here's what we're doing. And we need a sound person and blah, blah, blah. So she was like, okay, I can do that. And I was just gonna, and the thing is that there were gonna be a lot of people coming from all over, and I didn't know. I lived in the Martin, and I felt like I didn't want to have to deal with a bunch of people trying to stay at my house. Like, where am I gonna stay? Can I stay at your house, Calvin? So I told people, you can't stay at my house. But I told Nellie, you can stay at my house. You can have my apartment. And that was like the way that I was convinced that she could stay in my apartment and have the whole place to herself. So she came up here, and there was another guy named Mike. I forgot his last name, but he also had done sound at some shows, and so he had access to a PA. And so it was Mike and Nellie worked together. And then the other thing I felt was really important is that a lot of times I had gone to musical events, and the atmosphere at the musical event, for some reason, because I felt like music is about, for me, freedom. Art could be, you could say art is about freedom. Yet, at many musical events, I felt that the atmosphere was rather oppressive. And as a commercial endeavor, why should a musical event be any different than a cinematic experience, or perhaps a sporting event? You buy a ticket, you go in, you find your seat, you sit down. It's at the baseball game, I'll take a beer, you know, go, 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 go. There's some 6-year-old next to you, like, I want one too. This is just for big kids, you know. But for some reason at a musical event, it wasn't like that. You had these security guards who were subjecting you to rather strange search and seizure rules that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, I felt like we don't want that. What we want is to create an atmosphere where people wouldn't consider doing anything other than enjoying themselves, or impinging upon anyone else's enjoyment. So I felt like the most important thing for doing that was not to have security guards. Well, I mean, there's shows at the Capitol Theater, the Olympia Film Society has. I've never seen a security guard in a movie at the Capitol Theater. So why would there be one at a musical event? So I was like, we're not going to have any. People are like, well, let's get some shirts that say security. I'm like, how about if we don't get some shirts? So that was another thing I thought was important, is to make an atmosphere where people just experience music and appreciate it and express music. And then I was talking to Patty. I was like, Patty, this theater's great. You don't have any, and this was a new thing to care about at the time. Okay, put this in the context of 1990, 91. You don't have any vegan options. And she's like, why would we? But I also felt like another thing is a lot of the people who might be coming to this event, they don't really have a lot of money. I think what we should have, you have things that are like $2 and $3 or $1. What if you had a bunch of stuff that was just a quarter? So people could come up to your stand and get something for a quarter, and then they'd feel good about themselves, and you'd walk and you'd make some money. You'd make money, they'd be happy because they have their candy or whatever it is. And it's vegan. So Patty's like, that's a good idea. Let's go down to the wholesale warehouse, see what they've got. So we went to the wholesale place, and we found all kinds of stuff that was like, that was cheap enough that we could sell it for a quarter. And so we loaded up on all this stuff, and we brought it to the theater, and then she, after, well, so then then the next thing was, all we need now.
Wait, was it vegan?
Yeah, there are a lot of vegan options.
Goldberg's Pikachu?
We didn't have those, but all the Ferrero cans.
Okay. Oh,
Cherry
yeah.
Clan, which is no longer called Cherry Clan, and lemon heads and all these things. And so I felt, okay, all we need now is to get the people here who are supposed to be here. And I defined the people who are supposed to be here as the people who want to be here. So what we did is we wrote, we had a newsletter that we sent out from our record label. And I wrote an invitation on the back. And I said, this is what we're going to be doing on these days, August 20th to the 25th. And anyone who feels that this is an event, the event described here, if this appeals to you, well, I hope that you'll come. And we sent out, we printed, I don't know how many of these, maybe 20,000, sent them all over. And we would send like 25 to record stores all over the place and take them on tour, have bands hand them out. And so we did that. But some people felt that this was not, it was rather vague. I felt like it was like, well, I mean, those few here, you can look at it. I felt like this is very clear. This is an event that if this description appeals to you, you're going to want to be there.
Why don't you read the first sentence?
International Karp and Unwound Convention, August 20th to 25th, 1991, Olympia, Washington, USA. As the corporate ogre expands its creeping influence on the mind, on the minds of industrialized youth, the time has come for the international rockers of the world to convene in celebration of our grand independence. But Candace thought, well, I think we need to be more specific. And so she and Stella Mars, who was down the hall from us, they came up with this more specific, much more concise invitation. And Stella Mars, I'd asked Stella to design the poster for the convention, and this is the poster that she came up with. And so she also came up with the design for this, she and Candace, for a Kay announces the International Karp and Unwound Convention to be held in Olympia, Washington, August 21st through 25th, 1981. Music, swimming, discoing, eating. Just cut it to bare bones. That's what's going to happen. And so, and this was sent out to, it was sent out to bands, and it was sent out, as a label, we had done a lot of mail order. Mail order was kind of what our main thing, because we didn't really get distributed widely to stores, but we did sell a lot through mail order. And so we had a lot of people that we felt were like pen pals that bought a lot of stuff from us. So we sent these to some of the people who were buying stuff from us all over the country and all over the world. We also sent them to bands that we had met or that we knew or that we distributed records by. We also sent them to people that we just felt were artists that should be there. And I try to find some examples, and I have this photograph of a woman named Linda Smith. And this is a woman who lived in Baltimore. I've never actually met Linda Smith still. But we corresponded, and she did music, she made cassettes, and she sold them. And we distributed them through our newsletter. And so there were a lot of people like that, like the guy Ray Mason who lived in Massachusetts, and people in South Dakota and California, all over the country. And so we sent them invitations. So you should come to our convention. And then there were a lot of bands that were more like working bands, because what Lois is showing you in the 80s, the calendar was flipping over. It was no longer the 80s, now the 90s. And bands that we were working with were different. They were more like, it was this new kind of band where they actually seemed to be serious.
Have expectations.
Yes, they were like almost professional. And they were having on records on labels, and they were touring more regularly than most of the people. I mean, we never toured at all, hardly. I mean, it'd be happening until like 1990. We had barely toured because there was no chance for us to tour. So we asked bands that we knew, that we had met, like Fugazi was one of the most well-known bands that we asked, but and everyone, I just said, we're having this convention in August. And they're like, okay, I'll be there. So there's only a couple bands that were like, we can't do that. But that was mostly bands that actually didn't tour at all anyway. They hardly ever left where they were from. But most of the bands who did travel were just like, we'll be there. And a lot of the people that I was inviting, some of them showed up, some of them didn't. There was an artist who fits this description like Linda Smith, someone who just makes their own music and sells them themselves, and we distributed their stuff. And then an artist in Texas named Jandek, and we had distributed his records. And I was like, I really want Jandek to play the convention. So I called him up, and I said, hey, I'm doing this convention, and I really want you to come play. And he's like, well, he had never played a show. He'd never performed live. He just made records. Just like Linda Smith, I don't think I'd ever played any shows. So he's like, oh, maybe I'll do that. Yeah, I might do that, I don't know. And I said, well, I'll call you back in a couple weeks. So I called him back a couple weeks later, and it was like on a Friday, about 8 o'clock. He was like, what? I was like, oh, did I wake you up? I'm sleeping. I said, I'm sorry, I'll try you back. Never actually got a hold of him again. And that's been
20 years.
20 years. But the thing is, I didn't really know who this guy was. I didn't even know what he looked like. And so at the convention, when the convention finally happened, and they're like, yeah, this is great, this is awesome. I said, yeah, I wish Janet could have been here. That would have been really great. And they go, how do you know he isn't? Good point. Anyway, so then it all came together. We had this convention, and there was lots of people coming to play, and we had the show in the park, and Reese Nelson was going to have, we were going to have shows. I didn't want any shows to be overlapping. I wanted you to be able, if you wanted to, and I don't know why you'd want to, but if you wanted to see every band, you could. So we had an afternoon show at the Surf Club, and then an evening show at the Capitol Theater, and then you would go back to the Surf Club and dance until 4 or 5 in the morning. And that worked out pretty well. And then the other shows would be earlier, like the Smithfield would be at noon or something, or the show at the ABC House was earlier, so that if you're really crazy and seeing 7 or 8 bands in one day, and then get up at 8 in the morning and you go to the ABC House to see the new bands, if you wanted to, you could. So we had it all set up, and also what was happening in Tacoma, there was some hip hop groups that were happening in Tacoma, and I wanted to get some representation of the hip hop groups at the convention. And I listening to some of the records. There was one band that I felt like they were actually had kind of like poppy songs. because a lot of them, their songs were very, very catchy. They were just kind of, and I felt like this isn't, because a lot of the hip hop that I was excited about was a lot more kind of poppy, catchy, dancey songs. And a lot of hip hop at that time was getting away from being dancey. And I felt like, well, that's just not my thing. I want to be able to, it's got to move. So there was this group called High Performance, and I said, and they were, I had some catchy songs, and I was like, well, I'll get them to play, or I'll ask them to play. And so I got a hold of them, and they were like, well, we can do it for $500. Okay. Nobody had asked for, well, there was one other band that asked for money, and that was this band called L7, who came from LA. And they asked, we need $300. I'm like, okay. But no one else ever said a word about money. No one asked about money, they just said, we'll be here. And we ended up paying people, like, if L7 hadn't asked for $300, they would have gotten paid a lot more. But since they asked, they said they need $300, we gave them $300. But other bands, we paid whatever what came in the door, whatever made sense. They got the money. And my friend Bruce Pavitt, who had lived in Olympia, he was like, you're paying these people? Well, most of these bands, you could just give them a lollipop and a pat in the head. You run your business your way? So anyway, it all came together, and then right before the convention, a couple weeks before the convention, many of the women who were involved in music in Olympia felt like, well, we want to play too. And I felt like, we want to have a night, it's just women. And I felt like, well, I was against the idea because I felt like, because I'd had that experience with the experimental music people. And I was like, well, I don't want to be like a ghetto for the women, and then there's the real convention. Why don't we just, and there were already so many women playing the convention already, and I felt like, you know, why don't we integrate this into, we'll just integrate it some way into, if there's more people who want to play, we'll just integrate it somehow. They're like, no, we want a night. I'm like, okay, cool. So they had this, and this is, so that's why this poster, you'll see, there's some posters here, one for each night. Like here's the Wednesday night, and the Thursday. And each of them integrates one design element that Stella had come up with for the convention. So that the first night turned out to be this night, the Love Rock Revolutionary Ghost on Now. And
Not Girl Night.
which is known colloquially as Girl Night. And that was on the first night, which was Tuesday. And that came together really well because it was like the experimental music night. It was all people playing really short, lots and lots of people playing short bits. And that worked well because people came and they went, and it was just really well done. People were really working well together. It's like, okay, we'll come in, we'll go. And some of the established bands were already playing at the convention, like Bratmobile, for instance. But they played on the first night in a different configuration, and they did different songs. And then other people who had never performed before played, and that was really exciting because, and that was what I felt was why this night really worked, was that a lot of the people, like for instance, there's a woman named Christina Bellotti who I toured with previously in the year with her band, Autoplay, but that band had dissolved, and she didn't have a band, and she was coming to the convention, and she wanted to perform, and so it was like, oh, great. So she just did a couple songs with her friends. She put together something, and it was really good. So it was pretty exciting.
And there were teenage bands.
And there were some local high school bands, high school people who I didn't even know would want to play. And so they were able to play. And it worked out really well for everybody. Everyone except Nellie Corn. she was not happy because the way that we do things in Olympia are not the way that she was taught at Reed College. Because I felt, oh, we're organized. We've got stage managers. We've got people going to tell the band, okay, you have this much time, you have to get off, move those drums. And I felt, okay, that's cool. But see, my laissez-faire style was not really going over well with Nellie because she felt like some stage managers were good. Like Susie Tennant, she was from Seattle. She was at stage. I want to be involved with convention. What can I do? I said, you can be stage manager. Okay. And she was just like, move those drums. Okay, you over there. Whereas other people, like my neighbor Bradley, he was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, I got one of those. And so Melly was like, this band is great. They gave me a diagram. It shows me how many mics they need. It shows me when they're going to be starting and who's singing. This band, I don't even know who's in it then. And I was like, okay. Trying to make Nellie happy, and it all worked out pretty well for Nellie in the end. I think she gave a little, we got ourselves together a little more, and it was good. But the first night was hard because it turned out there was more people than we thought were going to show up, and the sound system wasn't really adequate, and we had to go and get more sound system, and blah, blah. There were lots of little tickle things. But overall, I think it worked. The bands showed up, and what's that? Do you have any questions? How about you?
How many people came?
Well, we had sold these passes in advance. And if you bought this pass, what was important to me also was I wanted to make sure that these shows were accessible in every way. So as much as possible, keep the price of the ticket low and make sure all the shows were accessible to members of all ages. So there were no shows in places where you had to be 21 to go to the show. All the shows were accessible to whoever wanted to go. If you really wanted to go, you could scrape together $5 and go to the show. So the pass, if you wanted to go to everything, or you didn't want to worry about paying for individual tickets, you could get a pass for $35. Just send us a photo and a check, and then we had a box of passes. And so we sold, I don't know how many, about 180 passes, maybe 150 passes, something like that. And then a lot of shows were just kind of whatever. The shows at the Surf Club in the afternoon were pretty well attended, but that would be like 200 people, maybe 300 people. And then at the shows at the Capitol Theater were between 400 and 900, depending on the night.
It's a lot of conventioneers.
And there was a lot of,
But only 150 people with passes.
that's right.
But how many people do you estimate came over the 5 days?
It was 6 days, but I don't know. There was a lot. It turned out. See, I tried to plan for everything. We have this booklet. It's like a program that told you about everything that's happening at the convention, and it also told you some background on all the venues and some other things that are going on in Olympia. For instance, we told you about all the venues here. And it told you about the possibilities of accommodation. We had arranged for some child care for people if they wanted to bring their children, but also wanted to have some time away from the children. We also talked about recycling and garbage disposal, proper garbage disposal, and the Peace Vigil at noon at Sylvester Park on Wednesdays, and included that, in case people wanted to go to that, because in between the time that I had came up with the idea that we should have this convention, and the time that we actually had the convention, somebody invaded a foreign country, and everything went straight to hell. And it was really annoying. And Brees Nelson was so confused. He didn't understand why we'd possibly be against invading Iraq. Why were all the bands so against invading Iraq? He didn't understand. And we're like, well, Brees. I don't have time right now. But we talked about Yardbridge Family Shopping Center. It's an important sites of Olympia that you should want to visit. And also
Wells.
something about the graffiti in downtown and the different places where you can see some good graffiti. And then Adam Shea did this really detailed map of various artesian wells around downtown Olympia. So if you wanted to walk around Olympia, you could visit all the various artesian wells. And so we also said, okay, here are some places that are inexpensive. You need to get you go camping or you want to go to a hotel. I called the Golden Gavel, and I said, how can we get a rate for our members, special rate? He said, yeah, it's cool. It's great. That's why we have conventions here, it's great. I said, how does it work? Well, just tell people to tell us that they're with you and we'll give them this rate. I'm like, okay. So that was good. Golden Gavel right there on Capitol Way, and it was kind of like a lot of people there. And so everything was cool. And I just felt like everything's groovy. All we need to do. And so strangely, people did show up. But it wasn't, I just expected they would, and somehow they did, which was really weird, because usually I put on so many shows where no one had shown up. But I knew that this was different. This was going to work. I don't know why, but it just did. And some of the people who were in downtown Olympia were really excited. Many businesses were just...
We've never sold so much root beer.
When are you going to do this again? I'm like, well, it's not even over yet. Like, can we just... And because they were just like, wow, all these people here, and this is better than Lake Fair. And I'm like, hey, nothing's better than Lake Fair. They're like, oh, so anyway, that's what happened, and I don't remember what else happened, but there was a lot of dancing until 5 or 6 in the morning. The last day was Sunday, and we didn't have any musical events on Sunday. It's like, let's have a day of just what we,
But again, a very important thing happened.
What happened is that you have to have a day of rest. A day of just serenity. So what we did, instead of having shows, is we had a cakewalk in Semester Park. And that was the thing where we had to call the state, because I had learned from the yippies, hey, they can't stop us. We want to have a cakewalk in Sylvester Park. All we have to do is call them up and tell them we're going to do it. And back then, there was no locked gate around the gazebo. It was just a gazebo. It was free. But if you wanted electricity, you had to call the state. And they so we had that, but also at the Capitol Theater, we had arranged for a showing of films on Sunday night. And in consecutive chronological order, we showed all 5 of the films in the series known as The Planet of the Apes. And the reason for that is unclear. It might have something to do with the teenagers that we met in Olympia in the 2 years previous, who had a lot of these teenagers involved with Tumwater High School had become, I don't know if it's fair to say, they're awfully young, but obsessed. But they were fascinated with this series, Planet of the Apes. And they would have what they called ape fests. They just watched all the movies in a row. And it's kind of like now with The Big Lebowski or something. They knew all the lines and but so I thought, well, that's, because one of the first movies I saw as a kid was, when I was like 10 or 11, I went to see Planet of the Apes. And so I felt like, yeah, this really ties the room together, show these films. So we showed this on Sunday night, and that was the end of the convention, and everybody went home. And I was gonna see if anyone had any questions. What's your name?
Jimmy Sharp.
Jimmy Sharp, yes.
I was wondering about the t-shirts. I heard that there was a cat that urinated all over, I don't know if it was being half of these t-shirts.
Oh, well, what happened there is that we had a, at the Capitol Theater, on the first floor, there is a concession stand. And I talked about how we wanted to have some financially accessible concessions. And we made those, we got these candies that were inexpensive. And after the first night, Patty came to me and was like, Calvin, you made me buy all these candies, nobody wants those candies. I have these candies, they're sitting there, nobody's buying them. I was like, what? So I went on, I was actually performing that night. So the first night my band was playing. So I went up and I had taken a hat and I filled it with all the different candies that were 25 cents. And so before we played, I said, hey, Patty has got these special vegan candies and they're only a quarter. And she got them just for you guys. And I showed everyone, I named them off, and I put them out so that everyone could see all the great candies. And then after that, now that people knew they existed, because see, people were so used to all this expensive candy. They were like, we didn't even bother to notice. We just assumed everything cost $3. So after that, everything fine. But upstairs in the lobby, we had a little place where bands could sell their records, and we also had a bunch of T-shirts, and we were selling some shirts for the convention, shirts for K, and different bands, and bands had their shirts, and bands had their records they were selling. And Patty Kovacs, who was running the theater, had several cats who lived in the theater. And every night, the cats would go in to our T-shirts and sleep on them. They would sleep on them all day, actually, but then they would also urinate on them. Because they wanted to make sure you understood, this is my Melvin. So, after the first night, we're like, oh, these cats peed all over the cat's like, oh, they did? Oh, that's, bad cat. So then, for some reason, thought, well, now that'll do it. So then the next night, the cat peed on the shirts again. Put them in the washing machine. The thing about the cat pee is you couldn't put it in the washing machine. It doesn't, it's still, yeah. So that happened about 3 nights in a row before we finally realized we're going to have to either lock up the cat or lock up the shirts. And Patty wouldn't allow us to lock up the cat. So, there was that problem. Yes, thanks for bringing that up. And what's your name?
My name's Tim.
Tim.
I was one of those kids that actually went to school and worked in downtown Seattle, and I knew the monastery, and that was kind of my scene up there. First, just a quick comment. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It brings back a lot of really fun memories. People that you made growing up for me, very fun. Got to see a lot of cool music when I was a kid up in the Seattle area. But I was wondering, what kind of relationship did you have with the law enforcement down here? Because you mentioned that the Metropolis closed, and I believe that was after a DOA show that they closed it down, and we were just pissed.
Oh.
And then we ended up going to another show the week after, I think, up at Art to Go, which was a little venue that only played a few shows. They shut that down. Then they closed down the Guerrilla Gardens. They were really just trying to shut the punk rockers out of the scene, it seemed like. And I was wondering what happened down in Olympia as far as that goes. And then just to follow that up too, how did you ever stumble across Heavenly, or where did that band come from? I just fell in love with that band, and that's how I kind of became acquainted with K Records. And I was living up in Kirkland at the time when Olympia, that K Record, this is a great band. How the heck did they discover this? So,
Yes. Well, about the police, that show that Lois was talking about with that band, White House, that was one of the few shows where, at the Tropicana, where the police actually showed up. And that was the only show that they shut down because it was too loud. But mostly, that venue had a pretty good relationship. The police hardly ever came there or had anything to do with it. And I don't know, I think that there were other shows that happened in Olympia that had attracted unwanted attention by law enforcement. But I'm not sure whether, for better or for worse, there came a time when the punk rockers weren't viewed as being a threat. And so they found other things to do.
I think there's also the fact that police maybe kind of figured out that they'd rather know where the kids were
Yeah.
than where they weren't. So that if there was a club where everybody was at, they knew it, that that's where the kids were, so.
And it was more like the normal, the kids that were thinking that punk rockers were for some reason undesirable. The other kids, they did drive by the Tropicana and throw bricks at the window or call you names that aren't necessarily, they're like, faggot. You're like, I'm damn proud of it. But it was definitely more like the kids were being. But I know that after the Tropicana, there was this space called Gesco that Brett Lunsford and some other people, they were like, why don't we get, because they were attending the Evergreen State College, and they said, why don't we get a student center downtown? Because Evergreen is so far away, it's 7 miles outside of town, and most students don't really go downtown. What if we have like a student-funded center downtown where we have events? And they found a warehouse and they opened that. That was in '86. And we were still under the idea that, oh, we're like the weirdos and people are going to throw bricks at us and whatever. But they had this other approach. They went to the city and they invited the mayor and the city council down to Gesco and said, hey, check out what we're doing. And they came down and said, hey, this is great. And they never had any problem with it. Because they were just like the thing that everyone knew about. I'm like, oh, so instead of being under the radar, you're like, that's a different approach. I like that idea. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Kind of, but, I don't know if it was a spillover from Southern California and the whole, Ronald Reagan. I don't really know, but it seemed like there was a lot more police presence at the shows in Southern California.
Yeah.
Up here, though, like I said, it seemed like they were closing club after club, week after week, and there were burning dumpsters, and there was an incident at the Guerrilla Gardens where there were cop cars getting bricks thrown at them.
Well, I think the
kids
shows
kind of started to rebel. It's like, you're so alone, enough.
I think the people that a lot of the kids that started to show up, they were just wanting to have fun.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really about venting their anger at society or their parents. It was more like getting away from the anger they might have and finding a different outlet. That was my interpretation. But anyway, yeah.
And then about Heavenly?
Oh yeah, that was a band that, like we were talking, I was talking about earlier, the bands that we had corresponded with. One of the bands that came to the convention was a band called the Pastels, and they had a label in Scotland called 53rd and 3rd, Stephen Pastel, and he and another guy named David who had a band called Shop Assistants, and both of them were in kind of large independent bands, and they were very influential on other bands, and they saw some of the bands that were akin to them getting involved with record labels that they felt weren't really giving them a fair shake. So they said, we'll start a new label so that these kids can have a label and be involved. And they wrote to me and they're like, oh wow, we got this Beat Happening album, we like it. And so we ended up doing a record with them and being with some of the bands, the Vaselines, and we ended up going over there and touring with some of these bands. But one of the bands on that label was Tallulah Gosh, and a band that I actually knew about before I even knew about their label. And in fact, Lois saw them play. She was in England in '86 and saw them play right about the time I read about them, and I was like, oh, this band sounds perfect. And then Lois wrote me a letter. I was like, this band's perfect. And so we ended up corresponding with them. And I actually was in England right before the convention, and they had a new band. They had become Heavenly. And I was staying with them, and I said, we're having this convention, and I think you should come. Well, one of them, the drummer, was actually coming to the United States in August. And I said, well, if you just stay 2 more weeks, you can come to our convention. And he said, oh, that'd be nice, but I gotta come back. But he did come to Olympia. He was only going to be in California. He came up to Olympia, and he really enjoyed it. And I interviewed him on Chaos, and then he missed the convention. And later he was like, why didn't I stay? I was like, I don't know why. told you, I told you that it would be a good idea, but you can't, you can't do everything. Yeah. But the one person that it was the guy, there was a guy in Germany who had done a lot of, he did a tour Be Happening, and he had done tours for Pastels and other British bands, and named Thomas Zimmerman, and he had arranged the tour that we had played, right, like 2 months before. And I told him, I said, yeah, we're having this convention, it's going to be, it's at the he had been to Olympia, actually, he had visited us, and he'd seen the Capitol Theater, he'd been to shows, and he knew about Olympia, and I said, yeah, we're having the convention, it's going to be at the Capitol Theater, and there's going to be all these bands that are going to play, and Pastels are coming, and it's going to be really good. And he's like, he said something like, and no one's going to show up, and it's going to be a big disaster, and it's going to be a failure. And I was like, what? Like, no one had ever said anything like that. No one had ever suggested that. Like, I had just been, we're having a convention. Like, great. No one had ever said, it's not going to work. And I was like, huh? I just didn't understand. Like, why would he say that?
It's still about the war.
But, he I think he doesn't, some people, they see the glass as half full. And others see it as half empty. Whereas the rest of us just see it as a glass of water. So,
Should we play some songs?
oh yeah. Well, does anyone have any other questions about anything? Because I only, yes.
I'd like to know
Yes,
about
what's your name?
Carol.
Carol, yes.
These poster things.
Oh yes, well, so, okay, when we had the convention, and I wanted to get all the local artists involved, and Stella designed the posters, and I also, another thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that Chaos was involved, so I went and talked to people at Chaos, and they did a they did some reporting from the convention, and you'll see inside this program, there's on the inside of the front page, there's like Chaos 89.3 Olympia Community Radio broadcasting reports from the convention at different set times during the day. And Diana Ahrens was one of the people who was involved in that. And there was a bunch of people who came down with recording equipment and interviewed people and stuff like that. It was really exciting. And so another person, a local artist named Nikki McClure, who also lived in the Martin Apartments, but not in that, by then she'd moved out. But she made these banners, and there was 4 of them, International Pop Underground Convention, and she hung them from the windows of the Martin Apartments. And I haven't stored them quite as carefully as they deserve, but I thought I should get those out and show them off, because they're really quite beautiful. And they're also beautiful in their decay, so there's that as well. And so that was just another way to get people involved. Yes, what's your name?
My name's Kim.
Kim.
Who designed the K record symbol and why did you choose the K?
Well, that was, not exactly, it's unclear why the name, it was K, but I did have the foresight to realize that a 1-letter name is not very, it can easily get lost. So I thought if I put this shield around it, it might show up a little better in the text. So that was the idea, to try to set it apart from all the other, like the L label and the F label, who are just lost in a sea of type. So that's what happened there.
So it was
Yes.
you
Yes.
designed it?
Thank you. Yes. But it wasn't really, it was a concept, it wasn't a design. I wanted every record have a different, it was just, the idea is put a shield on the K. But it wasn't like a set K. But after all, we got lazy and we just had one. Oh, here's a K, just put it on. Use the same one as last time. Okay, whatever. But it's still the idea that, it doesn't have to be any one way. So, well, now we, part of this presentation Oh, it went on a little longer than we thought. Part of this presentation was they asked to do some songs. So Lois is going to play a song. And I was going to mention also, just in passing, that tomorrow night Lois will be performing, and I am also at Northern as a benefit for some Japanese artists who have been affected by the natural disasters, recent natural disasters in Japan that we know. And so we're doing a benefit for that, and that's happening at Northern at a certain time, yet to be determined. Probably is determined, but is unknown to me. And a local band called the Maxines are playing, as well as D+, which is a special band because they don't play that often. They're from Anacortes, and so it'll be I think it'll be quite a treat to see them.
A rocking good time.
Yes.
I had this really crazy idea. I wanted to play a song that I played at the International Pop Underground Convention, and I noticed that my bandmate Pat was here, so maybe he would, even though we don't have drums, maybe he would join me up here and we would sing a song called Motorcycle Boy, and you can play drums on your knees or something.
You should play all that.